Hi, and welcome to Hypothetically Intentional, where we ask the question, what if we set intentions with everything we do? I'm your co-host, Michelle, and today we have a new special guest with us. His name is Daryl. Welcome, Daryl.
Hi, Michelle. Glad to be piloting your ship with you.
Yeah, I'm so
Piloting.
excited. Right.
Yeah.
So usually one of the first things we do on the podcast is to set an intention, and I don't want to necessarily put you on the spot, so feel free to pass the buck. But if you would like to set an intention for
No, I
today, I'm
think the
inviting you.
intention is the intention is that the technology works because you just froze on me. But actually, the intention is that we bring some light to this world and impact to the people who are listening.
Oh, I can't think of two better people to do that. Not to toot my own horn or yours, but when we get together, at least that's how I feel. I'll say it this way. When we get together, I always feel lighter and brighter. And I mean that in like a spiritual, whole being, authenticity way. So I'm excited. Let's see where we go.
Let's do it.
Let's dance. Do you want to tell the
What
story of how we met?
Actually, we are both part of a different community of sort of a business community, I would say, more than a light worker community. And I had been in that community for a little while. For whatever reason, the universe pinged my light, and you said, "Hey, let me ask that guy a question." So you asked me about the community and what I felt about it. And just based on our initial conversation, I knew that you were someone that I wanted in my own circle, in my own tribe. And we kind of gravitated towards making that happen. And now we're a part of multiple communities and serving people in the same vein, but very differently. So I'm blessed to see once again how the universe conspires to bring good people together.
Right. That's exactly it too. Thank you for that. The other piece of that is, as a bonus, I'm also building a relationship with your wife. So it's like I get two. I met you, and then your beautiful wife came on board, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, you're two amazing humans, and I'm so excited that we are traveling down our own paths, but similar paths, and that we can support each other and lift each other and, just kind of, be on the journey together. It's kind of cool. It's more than kind of
Yeah,
cool. It's amazing.
I find that light workers and energy workers and spiritual people kind of gravitate towards each other. And because the world tends to be a little darker and bleaker, those bright lights stand out a little bit more, and we kind of naturally gravitate towards them. So it's no wonder to me that someone with your shining gravitated towards mine. And then, of course, my wife shines brightly on her own anyway. So
Yeah. And it's just been a fun little adventure so far. And I have no idea what else is coming, but I know that it's like, I feel like when the three of us are together, it's like the sparks, the lights that happen are like ridiculous in such a fun way. And the conversations we go down, as somebody like, I resisted the spiritual world for a really long time, at least in the way that I show up in it now. And so for me to be able to have like open conversations where I'm talking about, I have the goosebumps, and that means that's my spiritual yes. And I have this feeling, and I'm getting this download. And like, to have you like not look at me like I'm crazy, but to actually join in the conversation, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so refreshing. It's so
yeah,
nice.
my wife is the same way. She hid under that veil for a very long time, and she's just now starting to step into her power and her spiritual gift as well. She's always had it, but now she's more embracing it, and she's trying to determine how to bring that to service, because like most of us, we have a service giving heart, and we want to
Yeah.
just, serve others. I'm a little bit of a dichotomy because I have a very logical brain and a very woo brain. So I understand the psychology behind the woo, but I also understand the spirituality behind the woo. And actually, with my own coaching business, I have often said I'm where the woo meets the work. because I know that it takes both efforts. So I'm one of those that can put one foot on both realms and navigate pretty well in both. So it's a
That,
little different.
that's amazing. I think that's one of the reasons that we connected so deeply so quickly too, because yours is where the woo meets the work. And I often say I'm where logic meets magic.
Yes.
Because
Yeah. And
I'm very similar in that way. Like I'm comfortable in the logic. And then when all this spiritual stuff and my intuition opened and I started listening and I was like, oh, you can't make this shit up. Then all of a sudden I was like, well, hang on. Like I'm kind of like everything we do within, like how we show up is where the logic meets the magic. And people are like, oh, that's so
yeah, I
true.
actually just had I just actually had a friend of mine put it a different way to me. They said, you're actually where the woo meets the world, because those woo
Ah,
people are trying to shine in this world and they're trying to bring their light into this world, but they're afraid to and they don't know how to. So what I help them do is find their voice and find their authenticity to shine brightly. So I kind of like that phrase as well, where the woo meets the world. But
yeah, that's
yeah, we're both
amazing.
here to serve others, and whatever way that shows up. It's nice to be able to do it in both realms, because we do live in a 3D world, and having to navigate that logic part certainly makes it easier to also navigate that spiritual part.
Yeah. And I think as you were talking, I kept hearing, your podcast is one of the biggest ways that you create a safe space for people to, whether they're spiritual or not, they get to show up authentically and feel comfortable very quickly to be in that, I call it like the safe bubble, to be in that safe bubble where that you can really just pour your heart out, so to speak, and know that it will be received in a kind and loving way. But also I like how you throw in some of your wisdom into your podcast. Like I think that's part of the reason people feel safe, because like you're like, they open a door or you open the door a crack and they step through, and then they find another door and then you open that one a crack and they step through, and then they find a whole nother hallway and you're like, come on in, it's okay, it's safe over here too. And suddenly you're like, how did that whole thing unfold in this 30-minute 30-ish minute podcast that this man somehow has this way of, it feels the same as like my intention with every community I ever have is for it to be a sacred, safe space for people to know that they can just lean in and also reveal, uncover, show up as their true authentic self. It's so powerful, but so many people don't do it.
What's interesting to me is that I fought doing the podcast for the first 6 months that I heard that I was supposed to do it. And now that I've been doing it for over a year, I've really found that I love that aspect of being able to talk to people and interview people and have them share their story. And when I heard, and I always point to the back of my head when I say that, because some people don't understand what that means that they heard, but I heard that I was supposed to give a platform for people to share their mess, to make it their message, to make it a survival guide for someone else. And that's exactly how the podcast has played out. But what's been really fun for me is having so many people come on and say at the end of it, I never have told that to anybody. I've never said that anywhere. And to know that there was enough safe space for them to feel comfortable enough to do that. And then the other thing that I'm always amused by is they say, that was the easiest interview ever. And in the back of my mind, I'm always chuckling. It's because I shut up and let you talk.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think there's another key piece that maybe you haven't pondered, maybe you have, and that is you really show up in like a true listening state. Like I never once when I speak with you feel like you are quietly judging me, or like you're like, if you have a question, you just flat out ask it. So I appreciate that, like that bold and direct like format that you have, where it's like if you have a question you just ask, but that question is coming from a true wanting to know versus like some underlying fear or judgment that you have based on how I show up in the world, or how your guests show up in the world. And that is another thing that, I don't know, maybe not so much anymore, but there was a time in my life where that was really absent and it was very hard to find.
Well, I think a lot of people listen with the intent of replying,
Mm.
where I'm actually listening for the intent of learning. I want to learn more about the person that I'm talking to, what drives them, what's their goal, what's their purpose, what's their passion. And then I can figure out how can I help bring that out and how can I impact and serve them better. One of the things that you know, appreciate is that because I do have that spiritual side and I always used to call myself like the modern day burning bush. Like,
Mm.
I hear the downloads that God is sending me and then I just say and ask. But that's it's funny because when I start each interview, I have to ask them before we even start the interview, is there anything you don't want me to ask you? Because that intuition will come into my brain
Yeah.
and I will say it. And if it's going to take them down a path they're not comfortable with, I want to know that ahead of time so I can actually connect that hinge and shut up as opposed to
Yeah.
just blurting it down and taking them down there. So I'm very aware that there might be areas they're not comfortable with, but I want to make sure before we even start that I know what those are so that I don't lead them in that direction. But I think active listening is an art that is lost a lot because of social media.
Yep.
And, I'm old enough, I'm 58. I'm old enough to remember when we had to percolate coffee.
Me
Now
too.
people bitch because oh, it's in a microwave for 2 minutes, right? We get so wrapped up into the immediate that we forget that there's an actual conversation that has to take place and there's an actual skill to communicating with people. And that's one thing I love about your podcast. You and your boys bring that actual communication, but you bring it from the younger generation's
Mm.
mind and how they work, and then us older generation and how we work. And you guys do that dance beautifully and intertwine the two thoughts and weave it. And whenever I'm listening to your show, I'm always, my kids are 32 and 24, so they're that same age as yours, but I'm always fascinated by how their mind works about these subjects you guys bring to the front.
Yeah.
Uh, you're not just talking about the weather, you're talking about some really deep, intense stuff, and how they view it is interesting because that's how I know our world is going to change because there are young people out there who are tired of the way society has gone and led. Now there's the zealot end of that of too much PC BS. We have to all be politically correct and wear a label and all that crap. But the way their mind works and views the problems of society and how they view fixing it is fascinating to me, which means that we're in pretty good hands if they actually get out there and do what they want to do with the love and compassion of doing it, not just stepping on platforms just to step on them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. I think, people were telling me that, oh, you and your boys should start a podcast. And I was like, yeah. And then the one day we were talking and I was like, do you want to do that? He's like, yeah, I would do that with you, Mom. And then, and I was like, well, do you think Jake would do it too? And he's like, well, he can be a special guest, like that kind of thing. Cause it was like, Jake's busy right now, but Andrew's busy right now as well, which opens the door for me. Cause then I get to have other special guests on, which is delightful. But I really had no idea where it was going to go. I mean, the intention was to connect with my boy, and hopefully in that connection, it would serve the world in some fashion. It's not like we're actively going out saying we're going to discuss this particular thing and make sure that it's, we drive this point home. It's very much organic and free flowing. But I had someone say to me right in the beginning about how like they think that the dynamic of, it might even have been you, but the dynamic of like me and the boys is like, it might be a way to just help other parents with adult children, learn new ways to engage or to see a new perspective because it's not their kid that's speaking it. And so it's different when it's outside, further out from yourself. Right. And so I was like, wow, there was something I just had never even considered. And yeah, we'll just see where we land. But, we have very strict, healthy boundaries in that if it ever starts feeling uncomfortable or challenging our relationship, then we shift out of it and do something different because that's first and foremost all the time. But I really don't see it going that way. We're enjoying each other and having conversations that we wouldn't normally have. Now, to be fair, like when we speak, like, especially when all three of us are on, you can tell we're a family because we'll start talking at the same time and we just keep talking. Like we don't stop and pause and do that intentional listening, right? And I'm like, oh, here we go. We're at the Thanksgiving dinner table, everybody's talking at once.
Yeah, but the
Which isn't
beauty
great for a
that
podcast.
that organic feel is part of the beauty of it. But it's really an attribute to the way you've built your family that your adult children actually want to spend time talking with you.
Yeah, that's fair. Kind of mind blowing sometimes.
Not all parents get to experience that, and I think that's really cool. But what you were saying about starting the podcast, I've often said when I started mine and I waited those 6 months that I just started to then, actually pay attention to the voices that I didn't need medication from so that I could actually do what I was being led to do. And, good things have come from it. And I think the fact that there's 1,000 million podcasts out there, but you guys took a different avenue with it than the traditional interview style or platform. I'm going to get my thoughts and meanings out there style. You guys took it to an organic, natural family dynamic. Here's a topic. How do you feel about it? Here's a topic. What's your point of view on it? I think that's led to a really nice teaching moment for those who actually want to pay attention and listen.
Yeah. And it's funny because I find, and we will be getting back to finding things like videos or articles to talk about. We kind of fell off of that for a little bit because life got chaotic for all three of us. But I find when we do that, I'm always like every time I think I'm surprised by something that some perspective that they have that I would have assumed, right? Be careful with that. But where I would have assumed they would have shown up in a different way. And then like we start diving in, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. That surprises me because what I know of you, and I've known you your entire life, which makes it messy sometimes, right? I would have anticipated you would have translated that or, engage with that in a different way. And then it surprises me. And so I'm just learning so much even about how much they've grown and evolved over they're 23, almost 23 years and almost 26 years now. Gosh, I'm old.
what I like, even like my son's 32 and my daughter's 24, as I said, and what I like when I'm talking with them, which I see when we realize that, oh my God, they actually were paying attention to something we said. Like we did have a positive effect on them. They weren't just tuning us out. And so to see that, and then to see how they take that and edify it to make it their own, is also, part of the gratification because you're realizing good, bad, or ugly, what kind of parent you were, what kind of impact you had on them, and how they've turned it to make it either work or not work for themselves, and the valid reasons why they do or don't align with what you originally were standing on. The biggest problem I see parents make is that they try to make little clones of themselves. And instead of trying to let each child be their own individual person, grow up with their own individual thoughts, most parents you will have my thought and my way of doing it, and you will be the doctor because we've been a doctor. You'll be a lawyer because we've been a lawyer. No, I'm going to be an artist and a painter.
Yeah.
Not enough parents embrace that gift that they're innately gifted with, and they try to mold it in with whatever the parent wanted. You don't do that with your kids in giving this platform for them to speak on however they want to speak on it, is a showing of that.
It's interesting because there are moments in just even thinking about the podcast, not so much when we're in the podcast, but sometimes when I think about the podcast, I think, oh my God, I'm going to learn, because this isn't something that we have normal conversations about with my kids. I don't ask them how they feel about me, but like, I'm going to learn what they actually think of me, or how they actually perceive how I think, or and I got brainiac kids. So there's part of me that's like, do I really want them to be able to tap into me in that way? Do I really want to know their feedback of what they think of me? And my conclusion was, yes, I absolutely do. And it's such a beautiful, refreshing way. But there's a piece of me that like every once in a while I get that pang of fear, like, oh, they're going to make me feel like crap about myself, but they never have. But it's like my own inner, I find those old patterns, even just in this podcast with them, where I'm like, oh shit, I'm actually worried my own kids aren't going to love me in this moment. What the hell? Where's this coming from? And then I got to like go in and do the deep dive into like, oh, what is that about?
I think you should actually ask them that question on mic.
Yeah. What they think of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you've built enough safe space with your kids to say what's ever on their mind. And if you give them that platform,
just a blanket.
It'd be interesting to see, because I know from your personal story, you've evolved, transformed from an entirely different person. What also is interesting is that as much of a healer and a spiritual energy centered person you are, your boys are not.
Right.
They have touches of it, but they still kind of look at you like you do have that third eye in the middle of your head.
Yeah.
and that in itself is fascinating, because again, it shows that they were individualistic in their ideas and you didn't force anything on them.
I did for a while. When they were little, I was still very much in my boxes. And yeah, so it's interesting. And I've had a couple aha moments of that just in conversations in the podcast, like maybe not to the outside world, but to me, where I've literally like done almost like that gasp where it like takes your breath away and you're like, oh, wow, that was powerful for me. Like maybe anybody in the outside world doesn't remember or notice, but for me, I was like, holy shit, what just happened? I just got like I don't know, a hit in a good way, but just a hit where it's like an aha moment with your kids of how they're, perceived.
Well, if anyone wants a real example of that, they should go back and listen to the episode where your son is, or either you or your son are reading the writings that he had as a child, as a 9-year-old or 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Some of his writings are very, very insightful, but also paint a very big picture of where they were at that moment. Mm-hmm. And you want to get hit with that 2x4.
Yeah.
Reading your kid say the things that, you never even knew were inside them. You're like, oh shit.
And how I perceived it then, right? Versus like, I feel like how I perceived it then was, oh dear, maybe, like maybe I should look at this. And then now it's like this spiritual 2x4 of like, holy shit, like, it's a whole nother layer of wow. Yeah. And then just how much I think in one of the episodes, one of the boys said, yeah, we grew up together. And I'm like, 100% we did. 100% we did, because you allowed it and I allowed it. And, Dan and I have conversations about parenting, a lot, because his perception is different, because he doesn't have kids. And so like he pays attention and he notices. And one of the things he says often is there's so much more ego in parenting than most parents are willing to admit or even realize. And I'm like, oh, without a doubt. I used to teach preschool. I learned a lot about ego in parenting before I even had kids of my own. And then when I had the kids of my own, you catch yourself in it. Sometimes you don't catch yourself in it. And you're like, holy shit, why is it so important to me that they show up in this kind of way? That's not who they are. So why am I forcing that hand? That's ridiculous. And I can see that now, but in the moment when they're 3 and throwing a tantrum on the floor because they need to move some energy and you can't accept that, like, it's just like, wait, oh gosh, if I only knew then what I knew now, but then none of us would be who we are right now. So,
right. Yeah. That goes back to the wanting to make the clones of them, right?
Yeah.
That is our ego. And, I used to see this because I played a lot of sports. I used to see this with the sports parents. They want to project whatever grandeur they had in their mind onto their kid. And if their kid shows any modicum of talent at all, heaven help them, because now, the whole world rests on their shoulders to live my dream of being, some kind of good athlete. And it was horrible.
And observing, I do a lot of observing since I've been doing the personal growth work, and that is observing how I show up in the world, observing how others show up in the world, observing my strengths, other people's strengths, right? Weaknesses, all those things. Like you can just when you sit into that space of observance and listening spiritually for downloads, it's amazing what comes in. And it's funny. I just started a download and now I don't remember where I was going with that. I was going to talk about my kids and how they show up in the world. Oh, here's what I was going to say. it's amazing how like witnessing them, the idea of witnessing them living out my dreams versus observing them and holding space for them to see what their dreams are and where their dreams take them. Like those are two very different things. And the fact that I'm in the latter and just I really am enjoying watching my boys thrive or go after what they want. Or even like Jake had to make like some, hard choices after he graduated and got a really great job, but then, kind of realized he wanted to be somewhere else. And then went after that, even though that was a big, huge decision because he had it great where he was, like on the paper, everything looked fantastic. And then he was brave enough and bold enough to seek out something that was more aligned, and my youngest in grad school right now. I don't know. It's amazing to witness them. I was never brave enough to show up authentically at that age. I just wasn't.
I think I wish more parents could give that gift to their children to just go and live your authentic life wherever that is. Home will still be here, right? Yeah. But you can go and be. I had when I was 18, I grew up in a very small town, 7,000. And when I was about 18 or 19, I had a chance to move to a bigger city and take a well-paying job. And as a kid who grew up in rural Midwest, I was a little afraid of doing that. And my dad gave me the best gift he could have ever given. And he sat me down. Well, I sat him down and told him my fears and what I was afraid of. And, he said, never be afraid to go find out who you are, because home will always be here. Home is always a phone call away. And if you really need, home is only a plane ticket back. So go wherever you need to go and find who you need to be. And from that moment on, I literally was able to throw a dart at a map every 2 years and just pick up and move, because I always had that security that home was always going to be there if I really, truly ever needed it. And that gift of freedom to explore who I was or where I wanted it to be was probably one of the best gifts my father ever gave me. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You can follow me on jidwellness.com. Social media would be Facebook is JD Wellness. Instagram is JD Studio. Michelle Albers with 2 A's, Aalbers is good. Daryl, where can they find you?
They can find me at Praxis 33 on Facebook or a Warrior Spirit on YouTube.
Beautiful. I have a YouTube channel too, but I never talk about it. I don't know why. Someday I'll dive into that one more.
That's where I host all my interviews. So I got to talk about that one.
Yeah. That's a good one. It's a good one. I do follow your YouTube. It's great.
Thank you.
Right, everybody. Thanks for joining us again for another week of Hypothetically Intentional. We'll catch you next time. Bye. Be you every day.
Bye.